But ultimately, like, I think we're putting like way too much emphasis on the pharmacology aspect, not enough emphasis on social determinants of health and all of the community stuff. Like, I think we've gotten so disconnected, and social media and technology only makes it more so that like we forget like we're social primates. Like we came out of the primordial stew, like we're animals, and like we forget that because we're so, now we're just on our phones, and we forget about community and then all the things that used to bring us together, and like the shared humanity. So I'm thinking a lot about like how do we advance a narrative of wellness, of human flourishing, and leverage the healthcare system, because that's what it's there for.
Good afternoon. My name is Graham Doerge, and I am the founder and CEO of New Waters Recovery in Raleigh, North Carolina. Welcome to our weekly podcast, Finding New Waters. Our goal in creating Finding New Waters is to provide a resource for families to help navigate the complexities of supporting a loved one struggling with substance use or mental health. When we find ourselves in crisis due to one of these issues, most people have no idea where to turn. We hope to shed some light onto what is often the darkest hour for many families. I'm joined here today by our continuing care coordinator, Ryan Jarrell, and Tripp Johnson. Tripp is the founder and CEO of Invita Integrated Medicine and the owner of Green Hill Recovery. As the CEO, Tripp is responsible for strategic decisions, organizational performance, and cultural management. Tripp ensures that all team members are aligned with AIM's core values: living-centered, accountability, unity, transparency, and growth. Additionally, Tripp is responsible for developing AIM's brand, the externalization of its culture, which involves representing the organization locally, regionally, and nationally. Tripp graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point with a Bachelor of Science in Economics and a minor in Systems Engineering. At West Point, Tripp was a 4-year member of the varsity tennis team and winner of the Patriot League championships. After graduation, he was commissioned into the Army as an infantry officer and completed the U.S. Army Ranger School, Airborne School, and Air Assault School. Tripp deployed to southern Afghanistan as an infantry platoon leader in 2012-13 in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. Upon return, he was selected to be an executive officer before finishing his service as a battalion operations officer. Prior to joining Green Hill, Tripp was a second-year law student at UNC and interned at the North Carolina Department of Justice. Tripp left law school to pursue his passion for helping young men navigate the complexities of early adulthood. That's a great place to start for me. Tripp, welcome, and happy to have you here, and glad that you could finally make it.
I've been waiting for the invite.
Well, listen, we had to work out some kinks before we had you in here, right? So I'm psyched to have you today, man. And obviously, we've known each other for a bunch of years now. I consider you a dear friend and obviously a confidant and a guy that I can go to with issues, questions, business-related issues. So it's really cool to have you in here today.
Yeah, excited for it.
Yeah, man. So let's kind of start with, how did you get into this field, right? And obviously you've got a military background, a decorated individual. So give us a little bit of background.
Yeah, well, I'll start with I grew up in Hickory, North Carolina. I thought I was going to be a professional athlete. I was traveling around the country for tennis, which was all going really well until I had a little bit of an attitude problem, an injury, and then that kind of coincided with I'd always put everything off to focus on tennis, and I decided, well, hey, tennis isn't everything, then maybe I should start having a little bit more fun. So that led me to really probably embracing a new identity. I really had an identity built around being a tennis player. The next identity I had was around being just over the top, a partier. And then I found myself at 17 trying to figure out how to make my family proud, because I hadn't really tried very hard in school, didn't have great grades. And they had all have their master's degrees and stuff from great schools. Didn't know how I was going to get in anywhere. So I was still good at tennis, but I wasn't great. And I looked up prestigious schools with bad tennis teams. And I found the Ivies. I was like, well, I could play with these guys, but they're not going to recruit me really hard.
Right.
Then I found West Point. and their tennis team, and I love the tennis team. I feel very connected, so I'm sorry for any Army tennis players out there, but like, we're just not the top D1 team out there.
Right.
And so they recruited me to play there, and it was a great institution. And I always had looked up to folks in the military, so it would kind of checked every box. Ended up barely getting in to the service academy. I think that coincided with the same week with the first time I got arrested for drinking. And then I, went to West Point, thought, oh, I'll get everything together. You've got to be, this is going to provide all the structure I need. Right. But it didn't. Just like anywhere you can find your group of guys to run with, I found my guys, or I might have started the group, at least in my class. So I started, just had the same pattern, work hard, play hard. Barely graduated, got in a lot of trouble while I was up there, which is all funny now, but wasn't at the time to my family. After graduating, like we said, I went to Ranger School, took over a platoon, went to Afghanistan, and I was still getting in trouble. Like I had this funny seasonal, I call it the seasonal arrest record. Like I would do really well all year, and then the summer would come and I would blow it up. And I think it was because I was much more comfortable picking up the pieces and putting them back together than actually wading into new waters. So it was like really comfortable for me to blow it up and then rebuild back to where I was, and then blow it up and do it again. So I got very good at that rebuilding kind of process. So when I came back from the deployment, I fortunately had a friend who actually ended up being in Congress, Max Rose. He kind of pulled me aside. He's like, dude, what are you doing? He's like, you're trying to be this character, this macho man, hard partying guy, but you really want to be more intellectual. You want to do other things, but you think this is what you're supposed to be. Right. It's like, you need to like investigate that basically. So I was like, well, that hit hard. And so I called my dad and was like, I don't know what I need, but something's got to give. And he said, this is going to sound crazy because you're this 210-pound Army Ranger macho, drinking a fifth of vodka, chewing a bunch of Copenhagen guy, but I think you're going to like this type of yoga, and I think you should start meditating. And this type of yoga was Ashtanga yoga. And he said, look, just try it for a month. Just do it 30 days in a row, see what happens. Yeah. And I said, cool, I did it. And he sent me a copy of The Untethered Soul, which is a book I recommend all the time, and a couple of videos of Alan Watts. Yeah. And that kind of kicked off this whole new path for me. And it was very much about, I had looked for a lot of, I guess, relief in, drugs, alcohol, and just embracing kind of the hedonic pleasures, as I call them. And that didn't work. Like it didn't fill whatever I was looking for. And yoga and meditation started to kind of provide that path for me, that felt like there were a lot of strings to pull at, and kind of went off the deep end there for a while. Yeah.
And dig into this Ashtanga, the actual practice of Ashtanga a little bit, because I don't know if our audience really knows what that is.
So it is Ashtanga yoga in the most traditional sense is just the 8 limbs of yoga. And so it's a holistic path of yoga. It's not just the asana or the physical practice, but usually when we're talking about Ashtanga these days, it's a particular set series of postures. And typically you do this kind of first thing in the morning. There's a lineage out of kind of Mysore, India, and I was introduced to that again by my father. Started practicing, and it's a really intense practice. So a lot of the power yoga that people talk about, the hot yoga, that stuff, a lot of it stems kind of from the Ashtanga lineage. But the really cool thing, and I think what's really powerful about it, is that you have this set sequence, and instead of a teacher walking everyone through the same sequence at the same time every day, what you do is you practice every day, but you go at your own pace, you follow your own breath, and your curriculum, as they call it, is really given to you by the teacher. So you kind of want some level of mastery over the postures that come before it until you get the next one. So for me, what it was like, it was really challenging. I couldn't touch my toes, and there's a lot of forward folds in the beginning. And it provided a really nice challenge every day and a way to really fine-tune my body and my awareness with that, because everything you eat drink, all of that affects how you show up on the mat. So at first it was really just a physical practice. It was just a really good exercise routine in some ways, but it also introduced me to the idea that there was more to it than just these postures.
Yeah. No, so is there a particular diet that people practicing Ashtanga follow, or?
Well, the Ashtanga or yoga's kind of sister science is Ayurveda. So a lot of people have some sort of Ayurvedic-ish diet. Most folks are vegetarian. I'm 99% vegan. Sometimes I'll sneak a piece of cheese, like if it's sitting out here in the hallway.
I've seen it.
I try not to tell people about that, but that's my real indulgence these days is an occasional piece of cheese. But yeah, so I've been vegetarian or vegan for probably 8 or 9 years.
Yeah.
Tripp, I've known you for years now, and I got to tell you, I think I've learned the most about your past from that 3-paragraph intro that Graham just read. I mean, I've known bits and pieces, but I think one of the cool things about working with you is you do have this story that to the outside seems really winding, but to know you is to really know someone who has kind of a through line and an intentionality behind it. And I mean, you've gone everywhere from like young tennis pro to someone who's in active combat situations in Afghanistan, all the way to, doing yoga with 28-year-old heroin addicts. And I'm wondering, like, is there a through line that you can identify throughout these pieces? Like, is there something that weaves it all together that makes it kind of trip?
Yeah, I mean, I always say it started where the through line at least starts for me was in 5th grade. I remember sitting on the floor of the gymnasium watching a talent show. And I felt like extremely untalented. This was before I was, good at tennis. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, man, like it would be cool to be talented. Then I'd be happy. Then I started thinking like, well, really, I just want to be happy. Yeah. And that led me to really having an early experience of, I could just choose that this is okay and everything is good. Mm-hmm. And I did that for a little while, but then the mind starts going, the ego gets involved. And that's, what really drove me competitively with tennis. There's also, there's an interesting story with religion winding into that, which was I grew up in a Christian household, but not dogmatic. Like we didn't really talk about it that much, but I thought, hey, if happiness is important, then I found out about heaven and hell, started thinking about that. I was like, well, happiness on earth is one thing, but like I want eternal happiness. So I better be very dogmatic about my, religious practices, what I need to do to get into heaven essentially. And then, again, my black and white thinking back then was very much like, okay, I'm going to follow all of these things. I'm going to be good enough for God. Then I'll get into heaven. And then when I started really investigating scripture, I found too many inconsistencies that my mind couldn't make sense of at the time. Mm. So then I threw it out. It was like throwing out the baby with the bathwater situation. So I said, well, hey, look, if that's not part of it, then I'm just supposed to have as much fun as I can right now, no matter what. And so it was really that search for happiness, and which I can now consider more of a search for like contentment and equanimity. But it was definitely this search for like how can I just be happy and be content in my body. And then the other kind of piece of that was I always felt very lucky. Like I always knew I was a really lucky person, and so part of my happiness was always going to be like being a part of something bigger and feeling like I was giving back to the world. And that's what obviously led me, to the military piece and then what I do now.
Yeah. Well, no, and I think that obviously, working with young adult guys, I can, that's been a passion of mine over the years as well. And what kind of really drove you to particularly work with this population and build Green Hill Recovery? And tell us a little bit about Green Hill Recovery too.
Yeah. So as far as Green Hill goes, I mean, I didn't have a passion for it. I mean, the truth is that someone had the idea. My first business partner had the idea for Green Hill. He was originally going to open it with another friend of ours who had gone through a very similar program to Green Hill. That relationship kind of fizzled out, and he called me and he said, hey, do you want to help start this? And I said, I was in law school. I had just finished up, or I was in the middle of my internship at the Attorney General's office, and I hated it. And, I've been devoting my life because I had this real, change in path when I was in the Army that basically said I can keep trying to change the external circumstances, or I can really work on me. And then I continue to spend a lot of my time working on me. And he said, "Well, you help me build this thing. I'll handle the business side, the marketing, all that. I'm good with that. But I just need you to help build a program and like run a team. I've never had any leadership experience, so I need someone to help with that." So I came on as the COO and a co-founder in it. And I loved what we did, because for me, that was exactly the path I had been on. Like, we were working with a lot of young adults that had similar situations. And I always say that if my family was not so supportive of me and had resources, I probably should have gone to treatment. I probably, I could have been in a lot different legal situations. And so the idea of, that was like, I got to jump. I was in law school to figure out what I wanted to do. And then this opportunity to like just do what I wanted to do showed up at my doorstep. So I certainly wasn't any sort of like visionary, like I need to go fix young adult treatment or I need to provide something else. But I certainly resonated with it. And I think the existential piece of like growing up and the confusing pieces, especially now, and I think it's even more confusing for 22-year-olds now than it was when I was 22. I just really sympathize with the position these guys are in, and that there's kind of like a path out of it, but that it can be very difficult to navigate, and especially when you have substance use concerns, mental health concerns, but also like you want to do things in life. It's not just a vacation, and certainly getting sober isn't a vacation, but what we do is like really try and build people's lives and so that they have purpose and meaning.
And clients are typically coming to Green Hill after completing some sort of like residential treatment or something like that.
Yeah, so Green Hill Transitional Living Program, typically it's 18 to 28-year-old male-identified patients, and most of them are coming to us after having done at least 30, usually 90 days of treatment. Occasionally they'll come, going through stabilization, depending on what's going on. But yeah, they usually come work with us for 6 to 9 months, and then the goal is that we get them back into school, help them establish careers, and really get integrated in the community in Raleigh, because there's just so much to offer here.
Yeah. And I love that, obviously working with that population, I can identify with it so well, because I was a young guy getting sober myself. I was 26 when I went into treatment, and for the first time, probably should have gone a whole lot longer or earlier rather. And I can identify as well with, you said I had annual legal issues, right?
Just like every,
I had annual suspensions from boarding school. So it was once a year. I was, sent home for a couple weeks, and that's just kind of how it went for 3 to 4 years. So, but I think that, with these young guys in particular, for me, when I was facing it, it was so daunting to think, oh my gosh, for the rest of my life, I cannot use these substances. And I wasn't married. I wasn't, there was all these life events that I was just, how am I going to do that? What is that going to be like? And, the reality was I was super fortunate because probably about halfway into treatment, I had the awareness that life is not over because I can't use these substances. It's just really beginning, because look at all the amazing things I can do, and started throwing myself into all this stuff, fly fishing and whatnot, and just finding really healthy, passionate hobbies. And that's like your Ashtanga. That's your piece. That's what gets you going in the day, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think it's so important for these to make that connection for these young guys, right? And a lot of them just, they don't have the wherewithal to go there,
Especially today, and we're going to be another podcast that talks about social media, right? But the kids I see the kids, because I've worked at Green Hill previously, and these guys are looking on TikTok and they're seeing all their friends and they're smoking blunts and they're drinking all day and they're meeting cute girls, and some guy's telling them to do their laundry, right? And that is like, exactly. And that is like unambiguously a bad situation, right? And the beauty of working at Green Hill and working with you guys is, what I really appreciated is it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not a cookie-cutter type program. You will do individualized service and be able not just to give this kid some order, but to be able to extend the kid some real compassion.
Yeah.
Because I think we all, like the three of us, all know how it is to be a kind of crappy 20-something-year-old kid, And we can have real, honest compassion for that as a result. Yeah. Tripp, Green Hill's an excellent program that's still like a centerpiece of like the Raleigh recovery community, but your company has similarly definitely had some changes over the years. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the expansion of services and like the through line that drove that, because you guys absolutely do fantastic transitional living, and you guys do a lot more than that for the Raleigh community.
100%.
Yeah. So this is where I can say I definitely was not the visionary for Green Hill, but in working at Green Hill and really trying to build it, I love what we could do. I always say if we could have bet 1,000 on guys coming to Green Hill and having what we're going to call as traditional success right out the gate, it's all I'd ever do. Because it's the most rewarding population. Because when you get a guy in young early adulthood launching into a career, like there are so many wins that can be there.
Yeah, and the ripple effect from that is incredible.
Oh, it's so cool.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like everyone knows, like treatment doesn't just like go well. Yeah. It's not always going to go well. So I've always, as you know, taken a pretty philosophical stance on things. And so I really, Green Hill had kind of was doing its thing from a business perspective, but I kept on running into these problems we had addressing the needs of our current clients. And that was integrated care. Like we needed psychiatry, and just contracting with someone, even if they're the best psychiatrist in the world, doesn't mean that they're actually going to be communicating with the rest of your team like you need them. And so the first thing was like Green Hill needs to improve, and the next step is integrating care. Then I've been deeply influenced by the effective altruist movement, which is under a little bit of flack right now with the whole Sam Bankman-Fried thing. However, I think philosophically it's super important because it, just like I go back to one of my through lines is service and really wanting to do something for other people, but not just wanting to feel like we were trying to do good, but actually doing good. And how can, so effective altruism is all about how you can use your resources, being your time and your money, to do the most good possible. And again, I love what we do with transitional living, but that had its own limitations. And the thing that sucks the most about Green Hill and just private pay treatment in general is that there's a pervasive scarcity mindset, and it's very expensive. You feel for these families who you wish you could help, but they just don't have the money. And so it became, I got really interested in the insurance side of things, and I really wanted to figure out if there was a way to work more with insurance and do psychiatry. And so that's the kind of genesis of where Invita Integrated Medicine, and now we're doing like a little rebranding, and it's the Invita Collective. So Green Hill and AIM were set up originally as separate entities, and now we kind of brought the whole gang back together and running it as one collective integrated care. And really the idea of a recovery-oriented system of care too. So there are multiple on-ramps and off-ramps in our system now. So guys who go through our transitional living may stay in the area, continue working with us on therapy and psychiatry, or people may start with us for finding a therapist or doing medication management, and may end up in a different service. But that gives us a lot of flexibility to just meet people where they are, build rapport, and then really work to serve them. So that's I think that answers it.
100%. And I got to tell you, I think being a part of that as that opened up and working at Green Hill, one of the most amazing things was that we were having this totally holistic comprehensive care where we were having weekly meetings, not only with therapists, but with the psychiatrist at the transitional living level. And no one else can even tell what a fantastic service that is. And we weren't doing it to shout from the rooftops, look at this amazing service. We didn't jack up prices as a result. We did it because you wanted to do it because it was the best way to do this care, and you wanted to do it the best way possible.
Yeah.
And there's such a need right now. I mean, obviously getting in to see a psychiatrist, getting in to see a therapist is, 2-month waiting list if you can get in at all, right? So I think that creating this when you did was so necessary.
Yeah.
It really has been. It's been a great resource for us, and obviously we've sent a ton of clients over to AIM, and it's been fantastic. So, what are your kind of plans for the future? I know that you're always kind of building and expanding, and I know that you're very passionate about managed care and all of that. Can you kind of tell us a little bit more about what you're doing moving forward?
Well, I think the first thing I'll say, and we can double click here if we want to at all, but last year was chaos. I mean, last year, as you both know from being now on the ground floor with two new organizations, Ryan, But the first year or two is just you're figuring it out. You think you know, and then what's the Mike Tyson, like you get punched in the face, and everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Right.
And like I'm at this point, like I don't think you can start something new without taking a punch to the face.
Yeah.
Especially when you're trying, I think like as you all are trying to do here at New Waters too, like we're trying to do something better. Like it's not just a cookie cutter. It's not just, hey, like we can do these services like this. It's a very creative process of how can we make this happen?
And why aren't things done this way?
And why aren't
right?
things
Why
done
isn't
this
this
way?
the standard?
Yeah.
You know?
And sometimes there's a reason and sometimes there isn't. Sometimes the reason's like people are lazy and they got greedy and they figured out one business model and they're just replicating it.
Yep.
But other times there are reasons and you're like, man, I wish someone had told me that. So last year was chaos. So I'm trying to stay a little bit more grounded in terms of future directions right now. Certainly, I mean, we do have a few things. I say that and then I go into a laundry list of things.
I know.
Well, we're going to be starting a full model DBT program soon. I'm
Cool.
working really hard with Blue Cross to come up with a unique billing code to help us do this, and then for us to share data with them to hopefully pilot it. Because this full model DBT is one of the most effective treatment. It's really has the best evidence base of anything in clinical work, and yet it's almost never done through insurance. And again, there are barriers for a reason around that because essentially insurance companies don't compensate you for those groups and the work it takes outside of it. So first thing coming up is full model DBT. We'll be kind of finishing. We're licensed we're not running a PHP level of care right now. We're probably going to start PHP as well as an ambulatory detox for people who meet that criteria. Maybe some point this year. We're finishing up our mental health licensure as well. Wow. So we'll have the 1100 license in North Carolina, which means we'll be able to do PHP and IOP. Don't see that happening right now. But the wellness concept is really what gets me. Like I view, as you know, like I talk a lot about health insurance and the importance of doing things through health insurance. And I think a lot about behavioral health and its direction. But that's not my interest. My interest is in this notion of human flourishing and just that this is the system, this is the healthcare system we have. And so we want to be able to tap into it to increase human flourishing. But a lot of what I hope to see in the future, also more sober living, really thinking about supported living. As we talk about social media, I think a ton about how things are changing and how like so much is online now. And which is great. I'm a huge technologist as well, but the real world is something that we all have to navigate. And I think housing, we have an affordable housing crisis. We also have just like a supported housing crisis as well. There are a lot of people who need services and they're just not out there. So I'm thinking a lot about housing. I'm also very interested in kind of making some steps towards, I want us to be one of the first people doing psychedelic assisted therapy legally in North Carolina. I think there's a lot of promise. I think it's funny because the guy who has a psychiatry practice now, right, like doesn't really like psychiatry very much. Doesn't. There was a great Armchair Expert episode that just came out. It basically says 10% of drugs work. 10%.
Right.
And so maybe we change it a few times and we get there.
Right.
But ultimately, like I think we're putting like way too much emphasis on the pharmacology aspect, not enough emphasis on social determinants of health and all of the community stuff. Like I think we've gotten so disconnected and social media and technology only makes it more so that like we forget like we're social primates. Like we came out of the primordial stew, like we're animals and like we forget that because we're so, now we're just on our phones and we forget about community and then all the things that used to bring us together and like the shared humanity. So I'm thinking a lot about like how do we advance a narrative of wellness, of human flourishing and leverage the healthcare system because that's what it's there for.
Yeah. Yeah.
So not much going on.
Yeah, no, just a little. Yeah.
As you just said, well, I'm going to slow down a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. I'm curious, guys, like, and it's actually, I think this is a good question for both of you is like, business as we know it, especially post-COVID pandemic, like so many businesses have endured these significant sea changes. New technologies are kind of disrupting everything. You guys are both CEOs for at least partially like substance use treatment places. And I'm wondering what kind of wider effects you guys see for the business at large coming up.
Do you?
Well, at least I think we can always follow the trends of Medicare and Medicaid. So I think we're actually a long way in behavioral health. For like everyone wants to talk about disruptive technology, adaptive learning curriculum. I think there's a lot of promise in it. But I just go back to, that's why I'm back to like the real world. Like that's where I feel like, we need these third spaces. We need these places to get together. And we need good housing. I think we're going to see, in California now, I believe Medicaid's covering housing. I think we're going to see a lot of trends like that. I think we're actually we're going to see a pretty big sea change in how we're looking at care. But when I say look at Medicare and Medicaid, what they're doing, they've done this integrated care for the past 20 years. And private insurance and private programs haven't done it. So now we're under a lot of pressure as insurance, because 15 years ago, you couldn't use your insurance for mental health or substance use treatment. So it was all private pay. That's all that existed. Now that insurance covers some of this, again, for better or for worse sometimes, but now that insurance covers it, there's a pressure, because now there are more programs opening up, doing, providing substance use and mental health services. So I think we're going to see a big shift in integrated care. I think it's going to become pretty common. I think what we're doing right now, what I'm doing isn't actually unique. It's just more unique in this setting. So I think we're going to see a lot of integration between primary care and behavioral health. And then I do think we're going to see a lot of shifts in how we're looking at the future. I don't think the healthcare system will adapt as quickly as it should, but AI is already more powerful than all of us. So I think it's foolish to think that it's probably not better at algorithmic thinking than we are. But I think we're going to need community. And I think behavioral health, the best behavioral health organizations in 15 or 20 years are going to be, managing a massive amounts of individualized data. And they're going to be providing community, both for, the people that they're serving and for their teams. And I think that piece is how organizations are going to continue to adapt and change. But I think this idea that, we have to see a doctor or a therapist for I think that's all going to change. Fee-for-service models are going to change. But ultimately, people need people and places to go. So I think we're also in the best, healthcare is 20% of GDP almost. Their mental health, behavioral health, substance use, it's only going to continue rising as we become a more, individualized society and living on our phones. And soon everyone's going to be doing their Apple VR sets, and then it's all over.
And I think there's so much more awareness right now too, right? And everybody is, just having these conversations. 10 years ago, people weren't having these conversations, and that's the reality. And now everybody knows there's just so many more tools out there. Yes, we're a lot more fucked up than we were, part of my language, but we, also have a lot more tools, I think, and there's a lot more resources, which is great. But in my, I love connection is everything, right? And connection is recovery, right? In my opinion. And I'm really from the school of, I really think that the smaller, more kind of boutique model of programming is really more effective. So I think that we're going to see, just talking about headwinds, we've seen so much private equity money come into this field, and, these organizations, a lot of these smaller programs are getting gobbled up by these larger entities and all that, and creating these monster healthcare companies. And it's just really hard to do really good treatment when you've got 900 beds across the country, right? It just is, man. We have 31 beds here at New Waters, and every day, you have no idea what is really going to be happening day to day. And there's so many variables all the time. And you have to have a really incredible team to manage all that stuff. And you've got, 900 beds. I can't even wrap my head around how you would manage something like that, So, my hope is that, people will really kind of wisen up to the quality of care in a lot of instances. And I think we do the really good job at that. And hopefully people get connected with organizations like ours who can help them navigate the complexities of all this stuff, So, good question.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that stands out about both these places, and it really is both, and I think that's very special, especially in a detox setting, is we get a community that's built. And
Yeah.
there are guys, Green Hill is the only home that they felt safe.
Yeah.
And we're a 7-day detox, and people are calling us 3 months later just to ask how we're doing, or they're sending us candy and stuff like
Or
that.
we can't get them out of here.
And yeah, that's also maybe a current difficulty that we have right now. But it's
Am
just
I going to have a TV where I'm going in my room?
Yeah,
No, that's not happening.
we do spoil them sometimes for the next level of care. When will I get my phone? You'll never get your phone.
Right.
Not at all. But that we build a community and that we're able to participate positively in these people's lives. I mean, it really is, I think more and more as I work in this industry, more and more, I think what a true blessing it is to be able to do that for a living,
Yeah.
And I think too that like you and Ben and your crew and Lewis Finch and all of you guys who kind of opened your programs within the last kind of 10 years, there really wasn't a whole lot here before that. If anything, And you guys have really built this recovery field or behavioral health, model here in Raleigh, and it's and you guys had a lot to do with why we opened New Waters here, and I had a relationship with you prior to, and Lewis was always telling me you got to do this, and finally we were able to make it happen. But yeah, it's really cool to see like everything that you guys have built here, and the reason, one of the other reasons I wanted to start this here was because it's such a collaborative area, and everybody has really good intentions. Not everybody, but everybody that we work with for the most part is super ethical and is just doing this work for all the right reasons.
Yeah.
And it's not just kind of getting people in the door. It's what is going to serve this client best, and we're sending clients all over the country because that's what we need to do to set them up with a good trajectory forward.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been great to catch up with you and chat here. Thank you for coming in today, Tripp. And where can everybody find your information? And
we can go to trippj.com, trippj.com, if you want some of the personal musing, and also some behind the scenes looks at what we're doing at the Invita Collective. And then there's aimwellbeing.com and greenhillrecovery.com if you're looking for our specific programs.
Great. Yeah, and we're gonna have all his information on the show notes. Obviously, everything will be put up on all streaming platforms, and you can find us at findingnewwaters.com. Thanks so much, and we will talk to you guys next week. Thank y'all.